The suitcase snapped shut beneath my hand, exactly as it had the morning I died. My bedroom smelled of cedar polish and the bitter suppressant tablets beside my bed. Pale gold light cut across the rug, catching the silver zipper and the train ticket tucked beneath my passport. At 8:17, my phone vibrated against the nightstand. 3 short pulses. I knew who it was before the screen lit. "I'm outside," the message read. "Bring only what matters. If you stay, they'll marry you off." In my first life, I had mistaken those words for rescue. I had climbed through the service entrance with this suitcase, abandoned my family, and surrendered my future to someone who treated devotion like a leash. The memories did not return gently. Rainwater seeping through a cheap apartment ceiling. A door locking from the outside. My parents' calls going unanswered because I had been taught that concern was control. Then the final room, cold linen beneath my fingers, antiseptic burning my nose, and no familiar voice beside me. I pressed 2 fingers to my throat. A pulse struck back, quick and warm. The date on my phone was 6 years earlier. Another message appeared. "Julian. Now." Headlights flashed beyond the curtains. My hand closed around the suitcase handle, but I did not lift it. Instead, I dragged the case to the wardrobe, opened it, and returned every shirt to its hanger. The scrape of each wooden hook sounded unnaturally loud. When I reached the train ticket, I tore it once, then again, until the departure time split between my fingers. The phone began ringing. I watched my former lover's name tremble across the screen until it stopped. Then I blocked the number. Footsteps halted outside my door. My mother knocked softly. "Julian. Breakfast is getting cold." In the life I remembered, I had left a note accusing my parents of selling their Omega son to strengthen the family. I had never stayed long enough to hear their answer. I opened the door. My mother stood rigid in a cream blouse, one hand still raised. The scent of black tea and orange blossoms drifted from the hallway. Behind her, my father waited near the stairs, his reading glasses folded in his fist. Neither moved when they saw the unpacked suitcase. "Is the meeting still at noon?" I asked. My father's jaw tightened. "You said you would never sit across from that alpha." I changed my mind. A car horn sounded faintly beyond the front gates. My mother glanced toward the window, then back at me. "If someone is pressuring you, this is my decision." The words came out steady enough to surprise all 3 of us. I handed her the torn ticket. "Tell the matchmaker I'll attend." My father studied the scraps without touching them. "You understand who Adrian Vale is?" Everyone did. The Alpha CEO whose silence could empty a boardroom. The man newspapers called ruthless and old families mentioned only behind closed doors. In my first life, I had refused even to see his photograph. Now the name left a strange pressure beneath my ribs, though I could not yet explain why. I dressed without help, choosing a charcoal suit instead of the pale Omega formalwear prepared for me. The fabric felt cool against my wrists. Downstairs, porcelain clicked as my father made a call. My abandoned phone kept lighting up inside the drawer, but I never opened it again. At 11:30, a black sedan rolled beneath the stone archway. My mother held the rear door, yet waited for me to step forward on my own. I paused beside her, hearing gravel grind beneath the tires and smelling rain trapped in the leather interior. "You can still refuse after meeting him," she whispered. "I know." Then I entered the car voluntarily. As the gates closed behind us, my father passed me a sealed folder bearing Adrian Vale's name. Inside was no photograph, only a handwritten note in severe black ink, "Ask me anything. I will not lie to you." What kind of feared alpha offered an Omega the one thing my former lover had taken first, a choice? Rain threaded silver lines down the restaurant's 30-foot windows, blurring Manhattan into a field of cold lights. Beneath the muted piano and the soft clink of crystal, I caught cedar, black tea, and the restrained edge of an alpha's scent. Adrian Vale rose as I approached the private table. The man society described as ruthless wore no visible display of dominance, no scent released to test me, no hand extended before I chose the distance between us. His charcoal suit was severe, his expression even more so, but he pulled out the chair beside him rather than the one across from him. "The vent above that seat is too cold," he said. "You may sit here, or we can move." My parents remained near the entrance, far enough away that their voices dissolved into the room. Adrian had arranged that, too. He waited until I sat before taking his own chair. Then he placed an uncapped fountain pen beside a blank sheet of cream paper. It was the same severe black ink as his note. "Ask," he said. "Why did you agree to meet me?" His gaze held mine without pressing. "Because your parents asked me to consider you. Not acquire you." The distinction landed harder than flattery would have. "And if I refuse?" "My driver takes you wherever you wish. Your family receives no penalty, and I will deny that this meeting occurred." An alpha willing to absorb the gossip himself was not the monster whispered about in ballrooms. Yet whispers had once convinced me to fear my parents, abandon my home, and trust the man who eventually left me dying alone. A server approached with hot tea. Adrian quietly turned the cup so its handle faced my left hand. His cuff shifted. Beneath his watch was a narrow black ribbon, tied once around his wrist. The rain vanished from the windows. For one breath, I smelled wet soil instead of bergamot tea. I saw my first grave 6 years from now, winter mud, bare branches, and one man kneeling after everyone else had gone. My former lover had not attended. My friends had sent flowers with misspelled cards. But a tall alpha in a black coat had remained beneath the sleet, wrapping that same ribbon around a small bundle of white winter roses before lowering them onto the earth. I had watched from somewhere soundless, unable to understand why Adrian Vale, the stranger I had refused to meet, had arranged my burial when nobody else would claim my body. "Where did you get that ribbon?" My voice scraped against the quiet. Adrian's fingers closed over his cuff. For the first time, control slipped from his face. "My younger brother's funeral," he said. "I wear it when I intend to make a promise I cannot break." The memory sharpened. The ribbon on my grave had not been decoration. Adrian had given a dead Omega the symbol he reserved for the people he refused to abandon. He could have concealed the answer, but he had promised honesty and paid for it by uncovering his own grief. I pushed the untouched menu aside. "Then make me one promise now." His shoulders stilled. "Name it. Do not protect me with decisions I'm not allowed to understand." Adrian removed the ribbon from his wrist and set it between us, black against white linen. "Agreed. But equality cannot exist if only one of us is questioned." His fountain pen rolled toward me and stopped against my hand. "Come to my office tomorrow. Bring every condition you want included in a marriage contract, and be prepared to hear mine." The elevator chimed softly into the chilled silence of Vale Tower's top floor, where morning light flashed across steel walls and black marble. Julian stepped out with Adrian's fountain pen in his pocket and a leather folder beneath his arm, its sharp paper edges pressing against his palm. Beyond the glass conference room, Adrian waited beside a 12-seat table. 2 attorneys sat opposite him, their tablets glowing blue beneath recessed lights. The black ribbon had returned to his wrist. A contract lay open at Julian's place. "Your counsel may review it before you answer," Adrian said. "I didn't bring counsel." Julian took the chair beside him rather than the one positioned across the table. "I brought revisions." Paper whispered as he opened his folder. One attorney adjusted her glasses. The other stopped typing. Julian drew out 6 pages marked in dark blue ink and placed them over the original agreement. The room smelled of coffee, leather, and the faint cedar of Adrian's restrained scent. The current contract gives me a residence, an allowance, and protection, Julian said. It gives you final authority over security, public statements, shared assets, and any financial matter touching Vale Holdings. That isn't equality. It's a comfortable cage. Adrian did not glance toward his attorneys. What do you require? Equal authority over our household. No medical, social, or security decision made in my name without my consent. Separate personal property, joint approval for marital assets, and an exit clause neither family can block. Julian slid the first pages forward, then kept one beneath his hand. And this. The attorney nearest the windows read the final amendment. Her stylus struck the glass tabletop with a hard click. Mr. Vale, this grants Mr. Julian complete access to Vale Holdings' financial records, including pending acquisitions, beneficial ownership disclosures, and internal audit reports. It also grants Adrian access to my family's records, Julian said. If this marriage binds 2 families, neither side gets to hide the rope. Cold air moved from the ceiling vents, stirring the corner of the unsigned contract. Adrian studied Julian instead of the amendment. Those files contain information capable of damaging both families. Then refusing tells me more than opening them would. One attorney began to object, but Adrian raised 2 fingers. Silence returned at once. He turned the amendment toward himself, read every line, and uncapped the fountain pen Julian placed before him. You understand that access creates responsibility. If confidential information leaves your hands, you will share the consequences. Yes. And you still choose this marriage? Julian pulled the original refusal letter from his folder, the one his parents' attorney had prepared in case he wanted to walk away. He tore it once, then again. The sound was small, but everyone at the table heard it. I agree to marry Adrian Vale, he said, facing the attorneys and the camera recording the negotiation. Not as an asset transferred between families. As an equal partner under these terms. Adrian signed the amendment. Julian signed beneath him. Their pens moved almost in unison, black ink and blue meeting at the bottom of the page. Then Adrian pressed the intercom. File the public notice. Release the unedited recording with it. The attorneys exchanged a glance. Julian's pulse struck once against his throat. Private consent would have been safe, public consent could not be quietly rewritten by gossip, family pressure, or regret. Adrian slid a slim access card across the cool marble. It bore Julian's name beneath the Vale Holdings seal. Your credentials activate at noon, he said. Both archives. No restrictions. Julian closed his fingers around the card. Warm from Adrian's hand, it felt heavier than metal should. A phone vibrated against the table. Then another. The engagement announcement was already spreading. On Julian's screen, dozens of notifications appeared, followed by a message from the number he had blocked the day before, delivered through an unfamiliar account. So this is what you chose. By sunset, everyone will know what you sold yourself for. Julian turned the phone face down. Across the table, Adrian made no move to take it, silence it, or answer on his behalf. The access card remained in Julian's hand, while beyond the windows Manhattan burned white beneath the rising sun. Noon was less than 2 hours away, and the first person Julian intended to investigate belonged to his own family. By noon, the rumor had acquired a headline, a price tag, and Julian's engagement photograph. Cold light from 3 monitors washed across Adrian's office, while notification tones rang through the glass-walled room like silverware striking crystal. Omega Air sells himself to Vale Empire, one article declared. Another displayed private messages supplied by Julian's former lover, carefully cropped to make his decision look like a desperate bargain for money and status. Julian watched old friends vanish from his contacts one by one. Invitations were withdrawn. A charitable board suspended him. Beneath the cedar scent of Adrian's office lingered the bitter smell of coffee gone cold. Adrian stood near the windows, his jacket folded over one arm. "My legal team can have every article removed within an hour." Julian slid the engagement contract closer, its thick paper rasping against the stone desk. "If you erase it for me, they'll say I traded one alpha's control for another's." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he set his phone down. "Then tell me what you need." The unedited negotiation recording, the original contract, and a room with a camera. 20 minutes later, Julian sat alone before a black lens in Vale Tower's media suite. White studio lights heated his face. Beyond the insulated walls, Manhattan traffic pulsed far below. He displayed the first contract, highlighting the clauses that would have restricted his finances, security, and medical decisions. Then he placed his handwritten amendments beside Adrian's signature. "I was offered protection without authority," Julian said. "I refused it. I demanded equal control, independent counsel, an unrestricted exit clause, and access to both families' complete financial records." Adrian Vale accepted every condition. He played the recording without edits. Adrian's voice emerged from the speakers, low and unmistakable. "If equality is the cost of this marriage, it is not a cost." Julian uploaded the files himself, including timestamps and verification certificates. He did not deny choosing power. He proved that the power had been divided. The response changed within minutes. Commentators who had mocked him began dissecting the contract. Financial journalists confirmed that no payment had been made to Julian. The loudest accusation collapsed when the former lovers' cropped messages appeared beside their full versions, revealing threats, coercion, and an attempt to dictate Julian's choice. Yet victory did not restore what the lie had taken. 3 friends remained gone. The charity board refused to reverse its suspension. Julian's name still tasted poisonous in half the city's drawing rooms. When he returned to Adrian's office, evening rain streaked the windows and tapped softly against the glass. Adrian offered neither congratulations nor pity. He simply turned a tablet toward Julian. "You defended your choice." "Our choice," Julian corrected. Adrian's eyes lowered briefly to the signed contract between them. Julian inserted the warm access card into the archive terminal. The screen opened with 2 directories, Vale Holdings and Julian Family Consolidated. Before he could select either, a red banner spread across both folders. Emergency board vote scheduled. 48 hours. Proposed acquisition requiring spousal authorization. Julian looked at Adrian. "Why does a Vale acquisition require my signature?" The rain thickened, blurring the city into black and gold. Adrian read the transaction code, and for the first time since they had met, every trace of calm left his face. "Because someone submitted it after our contract became public." Julian's fingers settled over the keyboard. "Then they were waiting for me to become your husband." Cold white light spilled from the archive terminal while rain tapped the glass in uneven bursts. Julian enlarged the acquisition file, and Adrian moved beside him, close enough for cedar and winter air to cut through the warm electronic smell of the room. The target company appeared legitimate, a medical logistics firm in Delaware, profitable, audited, and valued at $86 million. Yet the payment route ran through 3 foreign subsidiaries before returning to a private account controlled by a Vale intermediary. "The company is only a shell," Julian said. "Once Vale funds it, the money circles back disguised as consulting revenue." Adrian touched the transaction code in the upper corner. His cuff brushed the tablet with a dry whisper. This prefix belongs to acquisitions approved directly by the CEO. Meaning your authorization will appear on every audit. And your signature would make the transfer look like a marital asset decision rather than a corporate one. Julian opened the attached voting schedule. The board needed only one additional approval before midnight the following evening. If the purchase closed, Adrian would become the visible architect of a laundering operation, while Julian would be painted as either an accomplice or the omega used to legitimize it. Adrian called the emergency board session immediately. Amber lights brightened along the conference table as 12 directors appeared across the wall display, their voices overlapping through hidden speakers. Several demanded Julian leave. One insisted that granting a new spouse access to internal records constituted a security breach. Adrian remained standing behind Julian's chair but did not answer for him. Julian placed the ownership chart on the central screen. Freeze the acquisition and authorize an independent audit. A silver-haired director leaned toward his camera. You have no voting authority here. Not yet, Adrian said. The room went still except for the low hum of ventilation. Adrian removed his biometric signet ring and pressed it against the tablet. A blue authorization line swept across the glass. Under Article 12, I transfer my executive vote on this acquisition to Julian for the duration of the emergency review. Objections erupted at once. Adrian's hand stayed flat beside Julian's, the ring leaving a pale circle against his skin. If he votes no, another director warned, the bridge financing collapses. Vale could lose $400 million before the market opens. Adrian looked at Julian rather than the board. Then the loss will be mine to answer for. The decision is yours. It was not protection. It was control, real, ruinous control, offered without a demand for obedience. Julian placed his thumb on the voting field. The terminal chimed once. Acquisition suspended. Executive audit mandated. Across the wall, directors vanished from the call one by one, leaving black rectangles reflected in the rain-streaked windows. Adrian's phone began vibrating against the table as financing notices arrived. Julian expected him to reach for it. Instead, Adrian unlocked the final restricted archive and turned the screen toward him. You asked for complete access. No exceptions. Julian opened the transaction ledger. Rows of scheduled transfers glowed beneath his fingertips, all cancelled by his vote. Then a timestamp caught his eye. The shell company had been incorporated 3 years earlier, but its payment instructions contained dates extending 6 months into the future, dates Julian remembered from the life he had already lived. One listed the exact week Adrian's empire had collapsed. Another listed Julian's death. The room's temperature seemed to fall as the ventilation clicked off. Adrian studied the impossible entries, then met Julian's eyes. Tell me how you knew where to look. Behind them, the board display reignited without warning. A compulsory competency hearing had been scheduled for Julian at 9 the next morning. At 9 sharp, the hearing room doors sealed with a hydraulic thud, cutting off the muted bustle of Vale Tower. Amber light burned beneath the smoked glass table, and cold air carried the sharp scent of polished steel. Julian sat opposite the Vale Holdings board directors while a court-appointed physician arranged competency forms beside a silver recorder. Adrian remained at Julian's right, close enough that the wool of their sleeves touched, but he did not speak for him. Your suspension of the acquisition exposed this company to a potential $400 million loss, the lead director said. Explain how you identified transactions dated months beyond the present. Julian placed both palms on the chilled table. A safe answer waited within reach: claim an anonymous source, surrender his voting authority, let Adrian's attorneys bury the hearing behind injunctions. He looked toward the alpha who had entrusted him with an empire after barely becoming his husband. Activate the public record, Julian said. The physician paused. Adrian's jaw tightened once, yet his hand moved away from the recorder controls. The choice remained Julian's. Red indicators illuminated around the room as the encrypted feed opened to shareholders, regulators, and both families. 6 years ago, I died, Julian said. The ventilation hummed above the sudden silence. I woke again on the morning I was supposed to leave my parents for the man who later betrayed me. The future-dated entries are not projections. I recognize them because I lived through their consequences. A director pushed back so abruptly that leather scraped across stone. The physician reached for the emergency evaluation form. Julian continued before anyone could interrupt. He named 3 events that had not yet occurred: a compliance officer's resignation at 2:15 that afternoon, the temporary closure of a federal clearing channel at 4, and the precise routing code that would appear when the suspended acquisition was resubmitted before midnight. Each prediction was already included in his notarized statement, its timestamp glowing on every screen. This testimony may be treated as evidence of delusion, the physician warned. Your family could petition for temporary guardianship. You could lose control over your medical care, movement, and finances. Paper whispered under Julian's fingers as he signed the disclosure waiver. Then record that I understand the risk. Adrian rose, but Julian caught his wrist, not seeking rescue, only asking him to remain. The alpha stopped. His pulse beat steadily beneath Julian's thumb. At 2:15, a notification chimed. The compliance officer had resigned. Voices broke across the table, low and jagged. The first prediction did not prove rebirth, but it shattered the board's claim that Julian had acted without actionable knowledge. Regulators immediately extended the acquisition freeze pending verification of the remaining events. The directors could no longer revive the deal, yet the physician slid a second document forward. Until tomorrow's review, I must recommend restricted movement. Julian's access badge blinked from blue to red. His phone locked with a dry electronic click, and security appeared behind the glass doors. Adrian's scent sharpened, cedar-edged with smoke, but Julian released his wrist and stood on his own. He had stopped the transaction by surrendering the one escape no contract could restore, the right to keep his impossible second life private. Then the wall display flickered. An unfamiliar account entered the public feed and uploaded a petition bearing Julian's family seal, requesting immediate guardianship before the next prediction could occur. Adrian stepped beside him as the doors opened. Did your parents file that, he asked quietly, or did someone file it in their name? The family seal rotated above the wall display, its silver edges flashing beneath the hearing room's white lights while the ventilation system breathed cold air across the polished table. Beyond the glass doors, security scanners chirped as Julian's parents entered with their attorneys, and Julian's mother slammed a paper dossier onto the physician's desk. We did not file that petition. Julian remained inside the restricted zone, his red access badge warm against his palm. Adrian stood beside the boundary line without crossing it. He asked the physician to authenticate the petition's filing trail, but made no attempt to speak for Julian. His mother broke the wax on the dossier. Inside lay the original family seal, secured in a transparent evidence sleeve, and 6 years of correspondence with Adrian. The pages smelled faintly of cedar storage oil. We arranged the meeting because we knew someone was steering you toward financial records connected to Vale Holdings, she said. We believed Adrian was the only man powerful enough to shield your right to choose, and disciplined enough not to choose for you. Julian's father connected an offline drive to the public terminal. A recording filled the room with restaurant music and the soft clink of glassware. Julian's former lover sat in a shadowed booth across from 2 Vale directors, promising to isolate Julian from his family, ruin his trust in Adrian, and secure his signature when the acquisition surfaced. The last exchange carried a colder bargain. After Adrian's removal, the conspirators would let Julian take the blame for the laundered funds. Julian recognized the date. In his first life, it had been 3 weeks before he ran away. The betrayal had not begun with his death. It had built the road leading to it. His mother then displayed messages from the same unfamiliar account that had submitted the petition. The sender had demanded that Julian's parents declare him incompetent. When they refused, the account threatened to use a copied seal and manufacture their consent. Her hand trembled once before she steadied it against the table. "We should have told you everything. Instead, we mistook secrecy for protection." The physician compared the petition's digital certificate against the family's verified key. A flat tone sounded. "Invalid." The guardianship request had been forged. Then the compliance officer traced its authorization token, and the director's counsel went silent. The token belonged to a board-controlled legal server. Its recovery address matched an account used by Julian's former lover. Regulators immediately voided the family petition and opened a conspiracy inquiry. The directors who had demanded Julian's confinement were ordered to surrender their devices. Chairs scraped. Camera shutters rattled beyond the glass. Power shifted in the room, but Julian's restrictions remained. The physician's recommendation could not be cancelled until the scheduled review. Adrian touched 2 fingers to the glass partition rather than reaching around it. Julian placed his own fingers opposite Adrian's, the cold surface between them. "You knew my parents suspected a threat?" Julian asked. "Only that they feared someone close to you," Adrian replied. "They made me promise the marriage would never become a cage." Julian's father turned the offline drive over. Its black casing struck the table with a hard click. "There is one final recording. Your former lover names the person directing the board, and explains why they need Adrian removed before tomorrow afternoon." The wall clock advanced to 6:17 p.m. The physician gathered Julian's locked phone and access badge. "Your review begins at 9 tomorrow morning," he said. "The board votes to remove Adrian at noon." Adrian looked toward the unopened recording, cedar and smoke sharpening in the chilled air. Julian withdrew his hand from the glass. By sunrise, he would have to decide whether to preserve what little privacy remained, or expose the person who had designed both of their ruin. Cold rain rattled against the hearing chamber windows at 8:52 a.m., while the ventilation system pushed air smelling of dust and antiseptic across the steel table. Adrian entered without counsel, set a signed resignation before the court-appointed physician, and slid it toward the board representatives. "Withdraw the competency review, restore Julian's freedom, and my resignation becomes effective before noon." Across the room, Julian's restricted access badge flashed red against the physician's tablet. Adrian had offered the board what it wanted, but he had not spoken for Julian. He merely stood beside his chair, cedar and smoke steady in the sterile cold. Julian read the document, then tore it cleanly through the signature. The rip cracked through the chamber. "You promised my marriage would never become a cage," he said. "That includes a cage built from your sacrifice." At 9 o'clock, the competency session opened beneath white lights that hummed like trapped insects. The physician confirmed that the forged guardianship petition was invalid, yet warned that Julian's temporary restrictions would remain unless the evidence proved both competence and an immediate public interest. Julian rose. He could not access his phone or corporate systems, but the marriage agreement had given him shareholder standing independent of those restrictions. He placed his palm on the public disclosure console. Opened a veil removal meeting to shareholders, regulators, and press. A director objected. Julian authorized the transmission before security could close the interface. Every wall display turned blue, carrying his face into the noon board chamber 3 hours early. Adrian moved toward the door when guards approached, but Julian lifted one hand. "Stay." This was Julian's action to finish. The final recording played from the offline drive. His former lover's voice filled the room, thin beneath the hiss of compressed audio, naming the board chair as the architect of Adrian's removal and describing how Julian would be declared incompetent once his spousal authorization had served its purpose. The chair called it fabricated. Julian did not answer with another hidden file. He stepped into the camera's red light and surrendered the last shield he possessed. 6 years from now, Adrian Vale loses this company through the same recycled funds you approved. I am isolated, discredited, and dead because I trusted the person speaking in that recording. I know the transaction dates because I lived them. I know the burial site because Adrian was the one who gave me a name when everyone else treated me as evidence to erase. Silence swallowed the hum. Julian then read the future authorization sequence aloud and identified the dormant account scheduled to activate after the removal vote. The compliance officer entered the sequence into the board terminal. 3 accounts unlocked, each tied to the chair's authorization token. Regulators froze the accounts on the live feed. Shareholders invoked an emergency confidence clause, suspended the chair, and cancelled Adrian's removal vote. The physician returned Julian's badge, though the camera light remained red. His freedom was restored, his impossible confession now belonged permanently to the public record. Adrian approached only after Julian nodded. He placed the torn resignation beside the marriage contract, their edges touching on the cold table. Outside, reporters crowded behind Rain Street glass, shouting Julian's name. Inside, Adrian spoke quietly enough that only Julian heard him. They can never make your life private again. Julian closed his fingers over the contract he had once accepted for protection. Then tomorrow, I want us to decide whether this marriage still exists because our families arranged it, or because we choose it. At 12:01 p.m., the boardroom doors opened, and for the first time, Adrian waited for Julian to walk through first. Morning sunlight moved across the marriage contract, warming the cold boardroom table 1 inch at a time. Beyond the rain-cleared windows, camera shutters clicked from the plaza below, but inside, the only sound was Adrian sliding a plain cream envelope toward Julian. Julian opened it and found no revised contract, no settlement, no conditions, only Adrian's signed consent to dissolve their marriage immediately. Your parents' arrangement ended when you walked out of this room free, Adrian said. His voice remained steady, though his thumb pressed hard against the pale line where his wedding band had rested. You owe me nothing. Not gratitude. Not loyalty. Not even an answer today. Julian looked from the document to the man who had once buried him without recognition, then protected his freedom without demanding possession. Yesterday, I asked us to decide together. And this is my decision. Adrian removed his ring and placed it beside the dissolution papers. Metal touched glass with a small, final sound. I won't let fear of your first death become the reason you stay with me now. For the first time since Julian's return, someone had offered him an open door without standing in it. He could reclaim his family name, leave Vale Holdings, and build a life untouched by the marriage that had placed him before the entire world. The choice carried no threat to his freedom or reputation. It demanded something harder, surrendering the certainty that the future could be controlled if he simply avoided every old mistake. Julian lifted the original contract. Its amended clauses still guaranteed equal authority, separate property, and unrestricted access, but every careful protection now felt like scaffolding around a house neither man had truly entered. He tore it once, then again. The sound was crisp in the sunlit room. Adrian's shoulders tightened, yet he did not reach for the pieces. Julian placed them beside the abandoned resignation. I listened to my parents because they saw danger when I couldn't, he said. I married you because I remembered what you did after I died. Those were reasons to reach this room. They are not reasons to remain in it. Adrian met his gaze. Then don't remain. Julian crossed the space between them and picked up Adrian's ring. The platinum was cool against his palm, its inner edge worn smooth from months of silent turning. Come with me instead. Adrian's breath caught beneath the muted hum of the ventilation system. Julian set a new document on the table, a marriage declaration drafted without corporate provisions, family seals, or termination payments. It contained only shared consent, equal standing, and the right of either spouse to leave without retaliation. Julian had already signed. No arrangement, he said. No debt to the dead. I'm asking the man standing in front of me. Adrian read every line. He asked no lawyer to inspect it and offered no promise he could enforce with money or power. Instead, he took the pen Julian held out and paused above the final blank. I cannot promise that loving me will make your life quiet. Quiet was never the same as free. Adrian signed, then returned the pen and ring rather than claiming Julian's hand. The choice remained Julian's to complete. Julian slid the ring onto Adrian's finger himself, and Adrian's expression finally broke, the feared CEO lowering his forehead to Julian's knuckles while warm light caught along his lashes. Outside, the reporters' voices swelled as the doors opened. They walked into the marble lobby side by side, neither leading nor following. When someone shouted whether the marriage had survived the scandal, Adrian looked to Julian before answering. Julian tightened their joined hands. It didn't survive, he said. We chose it after survival was no longer the reason. 6 years earlier, Julian had returned to escape the life that killed him. Now he stepped into an unwritten future beside the alpha who had given him the freedom to choose, and whom he chose freely in return.